Hello, welcome to this episode of Red Helix Cyber in Focus. Today we're going to be talking about vCISOs. I'm really pleased to be joined by my good friend Manoj Bhatt for this discussion. Manoj is the CEO of CyberHash. He's got an illustrious career in information security spanning 25 years, although he definitely doesn't look old enough to have that against his name, including stints at the Ministry of Justice, Sopra Steria, Telstra, and current position as founder of CyberHash. What's really interesting is the difference in roles that you've taken on throughout your career between cyber delivery, cyber risk, and information security risk, but then also strategy, especially linking to what you're doing now with CyberHash, your position as newest leader of
It's Club CISO.
Club CISO. Fantastic. Manoj, do you want to tell us about Club CISO and where you've got with the community?
Thanks for that introduction. Club CISO is a fascinating community. A community of 680 CISOs and security leaders across the globe. So not just the UK, but from an Asia Pac perspective and also the US. What's really fascinating is it's got 12 years of experience. It's been supporting security leaders and a lot of those being CISOs. This conversation today about virtual CISOs is right up our street.
The topic that we're discussing today is so poignant. There's a lot of movement in the market. There's a lot of discussion about cybersecurity becoming a board level issue. That's been going on for long enough now to say that it's not necessarily a new topic of discussion at a board level issue, but it's definitely rising in importance for businesses across the UK. However, approximately only 27% of UK businesses have a board member who specifically oversees cybersecurity. That's come from the UK government's 2025 Cyber Security Breaches Survey. From that survey, we also know that within the last 12 months, 23% of UK businesses have experienced a cyber breach or an attack. It's really hitting home and providing the need for a strategic security leadership. That rolls really nicely into the topic and the structure that we're going to go through today. So we'll talk about the threat landscape, we'll talk about cybersecurity leadership, and then we'll talk about the role of vCISOs and where they can really make a difference within businesses. So going first to the current cyber threat landscape, what are you seeing at the moment, Manoj, that's bringing security and cybersecurity risks to the forefront of boards' minds?
We've seen that in the media overall. We're starting to see more and more around cybersecurity. If we go back to traditional ways of dealing with cybersecurity, Tom, it was very much around those boundaries and your data centers and a front door coming in and out. That's changed quite dramatically. People are sick and tired of hearing about it, but the reality is we've seen phishing, ransomware, we've seen cyber attacks increasing, not just coming from a traditional view, it's coming from different places. Third parties is becoming very, very important. People are using multiple identities and being able to control identities. Those are just some of the examples of the threats that we're seeing overall and what companies are having to deal with. Just to add into that, people think it's just the big companies. It's happening across the board. We work with a lot of small to medium enterprises. We're seeing a lot, particularly in Europe as well. A lot of these attacks are happening across the board. So nobody is really escaping. It's happening on a continual basis, I would say.
It's a real challenge. You're absolutely right in the small and medium-sized business case. It can be a bit of a misconception that they're too small or not got the profile to be attacked. The other element is, there's plenty of examples that we can cite, again, from that UK cyber breaches report from 2025, where actually cyber incidents have been existential for small businesses. And that really resonates with board. If you think about what the board's role is, leading, growing, governing what the business is doing, they absolutely don't want it to disappear overnight. So it's something that is also going to be brought to the forefront of their mind through regulatory pressures. For example, the Cybersecurity and Resiliency Bill, we know that's coming. Part of its aim is to bring it to the forefront and make sure people feel accountable for the security of the business they've got.
Yeah, I'd agree. We work with a lot of financial services organizations across Europe and EMEA that are having to do with things with DORA. And all of a sudden, they're really coming into the focus. Interestingly, Tom, we're working with a financial services organization at the moment where it's such a big step change for them. They've gone from, we had to do these things to now we've got to do significantly more and we've got to spend significantly more money and we need more guidance and support. Boards are definitely feeling the pinch now around we've got to do more. And as you say, the build's going to bring that to the forefront from a board perspective.
Talking from the requirement for security leadership perspective, I was hosting a AI security panel only just yesterday. A lot of the discussion around the threat landscape for that is just talking about the speed of change. So looking at the past, we can see that when the speed of change is there, it's very quick for businesses to get into what you term as technology debt. That could happen with security, where people that don't have a proactive approach to developing their security situation, or at least keeping abreast of their current posture and making sure it fits their risk tolerance, could very quickly find themselves in what maybe we make a new term. Maybe we call it security debt. They could find themselves in security debt against how the threat has changed and manifested itself, or how their environment has changed. I was using the analogy yesterday around building an extension on the side of your house. You've got your current environment, which is your house. And then when all your employees and your applications start using AI, it's just like you're bolting on an extension. That extension still needs to have locks on the windows, fire doors, damp course, waterproof routes, fire alarm, etc., etc. You've just got to extend the principles over your extension. That needs leadership to be able to make sure that the budget is there, make sure people understand why it's important, make sure you're involved in the project to start with, etc., etc.
Let's take that analogy a step further, Tom. I like the analogy. It's like building 5 extensions at the same time, because what's happening at the moment is businesses overall are looking at AI, but it's not one department. We're talking about AI all of a sudden, but it's, like, as you say, so poignant, because you've got the HR department looking at what they can do with things like Salesforce. Can they build their own agents? How do you change the JML process? You then have the development team who are saying, we can use AI to do some coding. Finance are looking at finance systems and thinking about how to use AI as part of the finance systems. I don't think it's one extension. I think everybody's having a go. The reality is the cybersecurity team fundamentally going to have to change the way it does things. We are going to have to be closer to the business. We are going to have to bring those technological advancements and be able to put the security wrapper and support around that. This is where our industry is really going to change over the next year or two.
That's a really great point. From that analogy, you've got 5 different project teams managing your 5 different extensions. There's a phrase that I've used over the last 10 years of my career called stakeholder leadership. It's not just stakeholder management, it's stakeholder leadership. That's something that security leaders, security managers are going to have to become very good at, in getting their message across and making sure they're part of the right discussions for all their different projects and influencing the discussion. From that point, the survey and the statistics that came out right at the beginning highlights a challenge. There is a security leadership challenge within organizations. How do you think organizations should assess whether they have the right level of security leadership in place?
It depends on the organization, Tom. What's interesting is some organizations will have a security team. Some are great. They have somebody at a board level and they come in and they will discuss cybersecurity, which is great. Actually, one of the things we certainly see is whether that organization needs some independence. Is the security team doing the right things? Is it meeting the right requirements? Is it dealing with the right threats? So having a sounding board to be able to do that. And sometimes that's where having an external consulting partner or an external party to validate what you're doing is really important. Then you've got organizations that take it on themselves to do security. So seeing more and more CFOs, CIOs, CTOs having to do something around cybersecurity, but not necessarily having all the experience and knowledge around that. So again, a strategic advisor or somebody who can help them. We're starting to see more and more of the market thinking about that. And it doesn't have to be a full-time role. It's just somebody coming in to say, by the way, we're seeing these threats, or this is how the retail sector, for instance, is dealing with cybersecurity, or finance or insurance or whatever it might be. The final piece around that is the IT director, the IT manager. I'm sure a lot of the audience are thinking, that's me. I've got all this IT stuff to do. I've got transformational projects, and now I've got cybersecurity being given to me as well. I've got so much to do. Having somebody that they can bounce ideas off and be able to talk to about cybersecurity is really important. Overarching, what we're seeing is a lot of people are taking on that security responsibility. Having an intelligent professional who is in the industry on a regular basis, giving them ideas and a sounding board, is something we're seeing more and more of across businesses.
There's a second vein, which is that You've then got someone who's part of your security ecosystem advising the person who has been given the ownership. They've probably got lots of experience from a broad range of industries as well. So it's not just a straightforward touch point from one place, and someone that's fully engaged and having this discussion with lots of different people. So the breadth of experience there is going to add lots of value. Having the advice that's independent as well. Sometimes you're talking to clients and you realize that this person's built their security empire, their security solution. They're not that receptive to the requirement for change. As we talk earlier about that security debt that's potentially creeping into some industries where the change is happening so quickly, you've got to keep pace. Otherwise, you can end up being quite far behind, and actually your posture is probably not where you want it to be. That independent advice is really valuable at that point.
Yeah, I'd agree. Independence is really useful, but also seeing things across industry and being able to see the patterns across industry make a big difference. That's what we tend to see across that independent advice, is we're able to see where the trends are going. Insurance, we're seeing something at the moment which is around tabletop exercises that the insurance sector wants to start to see more of. Layered tabletop exercises, and companies really have to think about, if we had two systems go down, or if you have multiple scenarios, how would you deal with that as an organization? We're starting to see trends, particularly across sectors, but also globally. We're starting to see things that are happening over in Singapore from a mass perspective, from a regulation perspective. We're seeing things particularly in the Middle East as well from a regulation perspective. Those regs then almost inform what companies are going to have to do here in the UK going forward as well.
Just teasing on that, it's really interesting to pull on your experience from overseas. How do you think regulations are changing overseas, and what lessons can we pull into the way we're leading security in our businesses in the UK?
If we look at what we're seeing as a pattern, it's quite reflective of what we're seeing in the UK as well. Operational resilience is becoming very, very much the norm. We coined the term minimal viable business. So if you have a cyber incident, what's the minimum viable business you need to keep going? We talk about, how do you get your products to market still, if you're, in a product organization? How do you make money? And how do you keep paying people, whether that's third parties or your employees? If you can work those things out, and then work out your third parties that support those systems and what's that data and all those things, that's your minimal viable business. That seems to be the theme across most of the regs that are happening across the globe. There's also a focus on third parties. That's not gone away. That's definitely been something that regs are looking at. That is where the operational resilience piece is coming from as well. It's definitely seeing a lot of those trends globally. If you implement those foundations, it should put you in a good position to be able to work through an incident if you were to unfortunately ever have one.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's really closely linked to the return on investment discussion around investment in information security. What's your minimum viable business? I love that phrase. And how long can you live without it? When are you not going to be able to pay the rent on the office or pay the wage bill? What happens? Having those honest post-breach discussion tabletop exercises are really good. They're underutilized. Again, it comes back to, a lot of people would be quite hesitant at having an engagement like that, but the value that comes from them, and I've seen this from a military perspective, where lives are at risk or operations are very sensitive in what they're trying to achieve. The most value that you get in the planning process is when you pick the plan apart. And if you get it picked apart by someone who's completely independent, that's even more valuable. When organizations do get security leadership right, what do you think the biggest impacts they start to see are?
If we think about some of the challenges, there are so many things to do in cybersecurity, but that's only one element. You've also got to run a business. You've also got to look at revenue. You've also got to think about your IT and operations and product development and a whole bunch of other things. Having that independence means you've got stronger decision making. You can start to bring those risks, and Tom, you've just talked about it there. Actually, we bring those risks out into the open to have a grown-up conversation around cybersecurity. Actually, what are we willing to accept as a risk, or what are we not willing to accept as a risk? That's really key. Also, that comms piece, we're going through a bit of a change in the cybersecurity industry about how can we be more business aligned. We have to understand the business. We have to be able to talk the language of the business. I was on a panel the other day and we were talking about the art of storytelling. Really important to tell those stories, really important to say, these are the scenarios. What would we do? Not just to think about that from a security perspective, but to get the board to do that together is really fascinating. And that hits home around there. Over time, what we want is we want to expose those risks so we can start thinking about those. So increasing maturity. We don't have to be the best at everything, but let's start closing some of those gaps around security. Putting the foundations in makes a big difference. Then having an independent view to say, by the way, these are some of the things like AI. There's going to be areas where some organizations we work with haven't really got a grasp of their third parties. They've got so many and they just don't know where to start. Nailing some of those areas down and being proactive and discussing those is where you can drive some benefit.
Having someone on the team who's thinking like that, that's
Mhm.
really, really valuable. Everyone's got their different strengths, but you can't necessarily teach someone how to think strategically in a short period of time. Most people would be very open to admit they either are or aren't a strategic thinker. It's that example that you use around third-party risk management and the risk that is posed to a business from its supply chain. It's a really, really poignant one because you've got to have someone who's ready to go and have those difficult discussions with key people in your ecosystem to say, actually, you're not up to standard. And we really want to work together to close the gap on this risk or whatever the discussion may be. There's also an element of importance of having the discussion to say, we think you're doing a great job. We've actually copied some of your best practices. We always seem to end up having the discussion that's maybe in the negative, but having a positive discussion, even celebrating that positive discussion is also important. We use that in other areas of business, but we haven't adopted it in information security. I don't know why that is.
Also, Tom, the thing to think about is, testing your processes with your third party. Some of our regs and some of our cybersecurity frameworks now talk about fourth and fifth parties and where are they sitting. And actually just testing that process makes a big difference.
Mm. Joint cyber exercising, yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. We tend to do it internally, but the third parties really are an internal part of your organization. We do need to start thinking about that. No, we can't treat them as a third party. They are an extension of our teams and we have to recognize that. So definitely seeing a real change in the narrative. That's what makes cybersecurity quite interesting for at a board level, is I do feel sometimes it's hard for boards because we in the industry find it's changing so rapidly. The way that we approach it is changing quite dramatically. Things like security awareness training, we talk about phishing, that was hot topic 2-3 years ago. Actually, now it's about cultural transformation. It's about doing things differently and it's about nudges. Now, that's hard for us in the industry, let alone a board who then has another million other things to think about and new regs when it comes to finance. So this is where having an advisor to say, by the way, these are some of the risks. Here are the decision points. Let's explain it to the board and let's help the board try and make those decisions. That's where they can really do with some support.
What we've been talking about is a real business enabler. That's the crux of it. Is that we've got someone who's a strategic thinker, they're well versed in the industry and the challenges that the industry brings, but then they're able to translate that challenge into actionable information that can inform decisions in the language the boards understand. Really, really interesting. The next thing to cover is we've got someone listening to this who's thinking, actually, they're describing in the rounds the situation that I face. I'm not a strategic thinker. I'm not sat on the board and I'm reporting into the CTO and my requirements are not getting heard or they're not getting answered and I don't understand why. This is something that could really benefit. What in practice do you think a good vCISO engagement actually looks like from that person's perspective?
When we talk about that advice, what's really important is having somebody who has got the experience. You really want somebody who's been a CISO, who's got the battle scars,
Yeah.
who's been through that process. That's really important, not a consultant or somebody who tries to. It's really important to have somebody who's been there and done it. We talk about shaping the right personality. If you're working within a financial services organization, as an example, There's different types. There'll be startup banks that are all about product development and, quick go to market around products. You want a CISO who understands that. It's about the skill set of the CISO. You talked about government and defense. Very, very unique. You probably want a CISO who's been in government and been in defense if they're going to go into a defense organization. There's no point having somebody who's been in retail going into government and trying to understand it, because I don't think they'll always understand that.
That links to the regulated industry piece. We've obviously got DCC for Ministry of Defence type organisations, but other organisations or industries, when they've got such intricate requirements that they have internally, but also that they need to extend over to their supply chain, having someone who's got the experience in having done and implemented that successfully and learnt from their mistakes in the past, really valuable. That's one of the characteristics that's going to separate a high quality vCISO from the pack. What else do you think you're looking for? The ability to communicate with the board is probably also on the list.
Yeah, communicating with the board, but also communicating with the business. You've got to understand the business. We always talk about making sure the engagement has clear outcomes. Be really clear about what you're expecting. Don't just take it as a bit of consulting and a bit of advice and mentoring or whatever it might be. I always say, make sure you do an assessment at the beginning, give yourself a baseline, and then make it clear to the CISO where you want to get to. Now, I want to get to a maturity score of whatever it might be, or we want to close these risks, or we want to address third-party risk. Make it clear, because then you can measure the value that is being added as part of that. Making sure that he's really clear about what your expectations are. If you're not sure, get the CISO to define that. You have to say, right, what is the impact you're going to make to my business? What are you going to do? What's the value you're going to add to me? Get them to do that. That really works for us as well.
Through CyberHash, you're obviously placing vCISOs in a multitude of different types of businesses. You've got a number of vCISOs that are part of CyberHash. You're having those initial conversations and planning those engagements on a reasonably regular basis. You mentioned about starting with an assessment, but what does a rough framework look like for how you plan to take an engagement to achieve the objective? There's going to be slight nuance in what people want to achieve, but what do you think the building blocks are on the roadmap to achieving their objectives?
It does depend from organization to organization, Tom, but what I would say is starting with some basic foundations around doing an assessment or taking an assessment they may have already done, or looking at some frameworks that they might want to achieve, things like Cyber Essentials or the CAF framework or something where we can identify those gaps. Also, thinking about it in the widest context. For instance, we're working with a client at the moment. They want to recruit an information security manager. We always talk about not relying on the vCISO forever. It's a point in time where you are on your journey. They might be about building that foundation, building the frameworks, building a strategy. Then you might have an information security manager, or you might be guiding an IT manager or somebody to take the next step of doing. Your requirements may change. In 6 months' time, you may say, right, we've now got the foundations. We want to build the next layer up. As part of that, having a flexible vCISO model makes a real difference. It does change on a regular basis, but setting a foundation of what you want to achieve is probably the key thing that we always talk about, and being clear around the deliverables and what you're going to do as part of that engagement, and then revisiting that every 6 months, because it will change. You might start off by putting a risk framework in place. Once you've established that, you may want to then think about third-party management and then think about something else. It's that journey and recognizing the one role doesn't always need to stay the same role. We need the individuals to change as they go through that process.
Yeah, no, that really resonates. We've covered what we think good looks like and the generic journey as you just described. People, when they go out looking for vCISOs, they may approach several different areas, maybe just individuals, maybe vCISO focused businesses like yourself. What do you think the red flags are that people should be looking out for? Because we know that there are some out there. We've previously spoken about people not offering enough time to be able to achieve things and recognizing there is a minimum viable CISO time. What are your thoughts?
You've got to invest enough time. Doing 1 day a month gives you very little time to be able to do anything. Organizations almost invest in that 1 day. By the time you've had your meetings and you've spoken to people, you're leaving out the door again. That doesn't always quite work, Tom.
It's the spam in your inbox from vendors.
Exactly that. You do need at least 3 days a month at a minimum to be able to make a real impact, depending on the culture of the organization. So a lot of our organizations will have days in the office, for instance. Being in the office alongside the teams, talking to the teams and being there and being an extension of the IT department or the CIO or the CTO or even the CISO, being there by their side is really, really important. It does depend on the culture of the organization, but you're right. You've got to be able to invest to get the most out of it. And that's not us trying to sell anything. We've found just doing a day or two a month doesn't give the organization the benefits that they're looking for.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really useful. It helps frame the next question as well. We've discussed the requirements and the benefits of strategic security leadership. People might be listening and thinking, okay, this is resonating with the benefits that I'm looking for, the outcomes I'm looking for, the challenges that I'm facing, and the type of environment I've got in the business. How do we go one step further? What are the key signs an organization should look to bring a vCISO in to bolster that security leadership? How do they validate that before making the investment?
Well, and Tom, just following on some of your previous question around the red flags, if you're looking for independent advice as part of a board and somebody to give you a view, there's some benefit in bringing in a vCISO. The red flags are around checking their credentials. Go and speak to other boards that they've presented to. Go and speak to the customers that they've been in. Check the credentials of the individual that you're talking to. Makes a big difference. Where have they done the role? Check if they've been a CISO. They say they've been doing this for a long time and sometimes aren't giving the best advice. So we need to be really careful around that. That could also be, as an organization, if you're looking to get somebody to support your IT manager, as an example, who's taken on cybersecurity, then it might be that you need your CISO to have a little bit of a technical understanding around IT and not necessarily just be strategic. They need to have a bit of an IT background or come from an IT background where they can bring the two together. Those are some signs where it can help if you're looking for independence and you're looking for some support. But also if you have a security team and you just want to be able to almost assess and support that security team to make sure that they've got some independence and they've got a sounding board, that's where we find that the vCISO service can be really useful for those organizations.
There's probably an element to touch on about budget as well. Budgets are always going to be contentious issues, and getting that opportunity to review what might feel like reactive or unprioritized spending, that's going to be a board level focus. They're going to be asking return on investment for this spend, and someone who can really explain the risk and what the investment is achieving. That's another thing. If that's something that people are struggling to explain the requirement for investment, that's where a vCISO, especially one that's got the right strategic experience, is going to be really valuable.
The other piece to think about, Tom, is the business benefit of having that independent advice. If you have a private equity or VC sitting over the top, just getting some independent advice around where to spend that money, what are the tools, what are the things that you can combine from a technology and a cybersecurity perspective, is sometimes the budget there, just by having that independent advice, can really make a difference. It's something worth thinking about. Yes, there is that spend, but actually in the longer run, it normally is a good return on investment.
The next question that flows logically from this, because we've taken the audience through the challenges, the benefits, and then what to look for and how to identify the requirement. But it strikes me that there's a lot that's changed for our industry with how strategic security leadership is placed within businesses. I'm saying there's lots of CISOs that are currently not in employment. What do you think's changed in the last few years that has meant that there's less CISOs permanently placed in businesses and that the model of the vCISO has come to prominence?
We talked about cybersecurity. Yes, it's a specialist subject, but it's more and more sitting within the roles of other roles that we have. The CIO has a bit of security built into what they're doing. The CTO will, IT directors, everybody has a bit of security built into their roles. What that means is that in some organizations, having a full-time CISO is not required. We're seeing prominence now of information security managers, which is the next layer down, doing what the CISO is from a role perspective, but might not do the strategic or the board engagement, and somebody else is doing that on their behalf. We're seeing that change, Tom, and that's also driving what we've always wanted in cybersecurity. We always talk about the fact that it's not just a security problem, it's everybody's issue. We all need to be doing it together. We're seeing that, and we're going to continue to see that. We're going to see less and less just security roles. Some of the CISOs we speak to are also taking on other roles in that role. I don't even know if CISO is the right word for it anymore, Tom, because some CISOs are taking on IT as part of their roles as well. You have some CISOs also doing a bit of AI as part of their roles. Some do GDPR and data privacy and data governance. The roles are merging, and that's quite prevalent in a lot of businesses. Hence why having a virtual CISO who's not full-time, you can come in, give a bit of advice, give a bit of guidance, give a bit of support, and specializes in cybersecurity, and then leaving as part of that is becoming something that the industry is going to do more of going forward.
A really interesting point about AI, because it's something that's come into businesses. It's taken everyone's imagination by storm. The business is throwing it forward and really wants to adopt it. Someone's got to own it. You're right, it could potentially sit across multiple different stacks. You've got the CTO that's frantically building applications and trying to enhance the efficiency of the business and save the business money or make things happen faster. Having that strategic security leader to not put the brakes on, not to say no, but to really enable that to happen. That's really important. And realistically, impacting that at the strategic level is probably the most appropriate place for it to happen.
One thing we're seeing a lot of, and I'm urging companies, is they're almost reducing their cybersecurity spend to focus on AI. And I think that can be a bit dangerous. Don't reduce your security spend to spend on AI because you think it's going to give you some benefits. Because if you haven't done the security piece around your data, you're probably making a bigger problem for yourself in the future. So absolutely focus on AI. I'm not suggesting that we should stop that. You just need to put a bit of a wrapper around putting some guardrails in place. Let's do it securely. Let's think about the data we're using. It's about to market around. Let's just be a bit cautious about how we're doing these things.
There's a great analogy that we spoke through yesterday at the AI security event, which is around, are you investing on going faster, or are you also investing in the quality of the seatbelt that you've got, from a car analogy? If you want to do one, you really should be least conscious of the risk that you're taking if the balance is not quite right. Manoj, it's been fantastic having this discussion. I've really enjoyed teasing out from your knowledge and experience where we are with security leadership, the challenges that we're facing internally from an industry perspective, but also businesses and the challenges they face and the requirement for security leadership. It's really, really important, especially at the moment with the pace of change of technology. I'll finish on one question. If organizations and listeners are going to take one thing away from this discussion about security leadership, and the role of the vCISO, what do you think it should be?
If you're going to take one thing away, it's about getting that guidance and getting that support, looking for where you're getting your information from. That could be through the vCISO services, but it could be through communities, or that cross collaboration between different board levels is going to be really, really important. Go and read stuff, go and ask your friends, go and, talk to people about cybersecurity. That inquisitive nature is really, really important. But again, we've got services, you've got people you can ask. There's some experts out there who've been doing this for a number of years. As the industry moves, please, ask us those questions. We're all more than happy to kind of talk about those things.
Excellent point to end on. Security tools don't reduce risk on their own. They've got to be coupled with the right sort of leadership. That's a really great place to wrap up. For anyone that's listening, if anything has triggered some thoughts within your mind and you want to reach out and get in touch, we'll make sure that both mine and Manoj's details are in the description. If you're interested of joining me on a podcast, make sure you get in touch, leave a comment. If there's a specific topic that you want to hear me research, find someone to talk it through with, then please make sure you add that in the comment. Also, with any comments around how you feel about security leadership in your business and what you're seeing in the market. Manoj, thank you very much for joining us. I know that we will be doing more podcasts together. Thank you, audience, for tuning in.
Thank you.
Take care.